And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. I'm Dave Duncan. And today we're going to kick things off, as we like to do, with a Creative Commons from the good folks at twit.tv.
This is Twit. A new bill unveiled yesterday that seeks to set a minimum age in the U.S., here in the United States, for social media use. And as you can imagine, something this big is never cut and dry. So I invited Shoshana Weissman, head at R Street Institute, and just awesome Twitterer, to share her thoughts on this bill. Welcome to the show, Shoshana.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to get you on. We've had you on Twit and a few other shows a couple of times, and I just always really enjoy it when you're on the network. So I was like, got to get Shoshana on the show today. So thank you. So let's start with the basics of the draft bill. You and the reason that I brought you on is because I was really intrigued by your words that you shared on Twitter about this. You certainly have opinions, but before we get to kind of like your thoughts on how this is shaped and everything, let's start with the basics. So it's called the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act. What is it seeking to protect kids from exactly?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, it doesn't say what it's trying to protect kids from, which is kind of, I mean, that's legislation. I think the press release had a little bit more in there. It's a general, people are concerned about kids on social media. I'm sympathetic to some of the concerns, even though I do think some of them are overblown. There's also a lot of exemptions. So it would apply to Twitter, but not ZocDoc. Like review sites are kind of exempt. Amazon, any sites that are basically for e-commerce are exempt. And the way they crafted it is it's fairly solid. There's going to be some discrepancy about what's included, but clear social media versus e-commerce sites, social media versus review sites. Those are pretty different. But I always get such a kick out of legislation that carves out video games, because that was a tech panic 20 or 30 years ago. It's, that's kind of, everyone's chill with video games now, which is always just kind of funny to see tech panic move to tech panic. And the basic of it is that they want to verify age for kids using social media. And it would also include Pornhub, because companies like Pornhub allow users to share video. It's functionally a social media site in most ways, but other legislation would not have applied to it, which is always kind of funny, because that's a part of where the concern comes from. And the basic thing is it's age verification. They want parents to verify age of teenage users. And the big difference with this, as opposed to many other of the state level bills, is that they create an age verification system through it, or they create the thing that will create it. And they have a lot of principles that go with it, but there will be a lot of incentive to use it, because companies can create their own stuff. But if they create their own method for age verification, it's subject to the reasonable standard, which is pretty YOLO. Like that can mean a lot of different things. Yeah. But if they go with the government system, then it's a safe harbor. So there's a lot of incentive for companies to just say, we'll just use your system.
Interesting. So, and this is early on, so we don't really know exactly how any of this would really be implemented, right? Like, is this laying out specific rules for this? It's interesting that you pointed out for the social media platforms that it deems to be social media, even though there are probably some that would be qualified as social media that aren't included here. Like, what are the exact rules that this would hold them to?
Yeah, the top line rule is there's actually a couple of funny ones. So I'll start with one of the early ones in there. You can't use algorithms for kids. Like kids cannot be shown content through algorithms. But as many listeners know, time ordered is an algorithm, and it does not exclude that. It only excludes like showing ads related to content, related to like the content, not to the user for kids. But it doesn't exclude basic algorithms. So it bans math. I know it doesn't intend to do that, but that is
algorithm, right? Algorithm is essentially math. It's coded math. So like, depending on where you draw those lines, it could be anything, on a computer.
Yeah. And as written, it means math. It means time ordered. It means anything except just data. So that in itself, it's a common problem I see in legislation. Schatz, in fairness, often writes more solid legislation, even if I think it's wrong and it has holes. He generally is a little bit better on that kind of stuff. So it's surprising. And then the rest of it is just age verification. And all it says is you have to verify age of users, of every user on the social media site. There's time limits on when exactly it has to start from enactment. But you will have to verify the age of different users. And either you do it in a reasonable way or you do it through the government's way. And if the government gives you that option, you're going to use the government's way.
Reasonable. Love that. If that's the terminology, it's like, okay, well, how exactly do you define that? I mean, age verification, like we've seen age verification. It's a little pop-up that says, are you 18 years old or whatever? And all you have to do is Y or N. And of course, everyone just hits Y. But like, what is different about the age verification that they're proposing here? Is this like a federal ID system, something that's a lot more integrated than just taking your word for it?
Yeah, and that's what all this new age verification legislation does. Other legislation might say, like the first version of Utah's bill was like, you have to upload a government ID and your home address to TikTok, which is super fun because Utah banned TikTok from government devices because of data security reasons. So like, maybe like you think twice about that. The final bill in Utah is a lot more like this, and it defers to the government on exactly how to do it, which I don't love, because if you can't figure it out in the legislative process and you haven't done that research, then you're just enacting whatever will be, will be. And this kind of does the same thing, because while it allows alternate methods, with the standard they have, it's going to be government ID or a biometric like face scanning. That's the whole problem. Like France wanted to do age verification more than anyone, and their own data like department put out a report saying, hey, there's no way to do this while protecting privacy. We want there to be, and we encourage people to invent a way. But if you're going to get accuracy, you're going to violate privacy. And if you don't violate privacy, you won't get accuracy. So when you put in that standard, you're going to violate privacy. There are people who are sure it can happen and who think technology exists, but I haven't seen it. And no one I trust has seen that. And even something like the age verification, basically the group, the trade association of the people who want to do this stuff are saying, there's like, we can scan your faces and not keep the scans. That'll be great. So the whole problem is the technology they want doesn't exist.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, I'm just trying to think of what other methods could actually be implemented. Are any privacy conscious groups that you know of saying, look, we appreciate what this is trying to do, or efforts like these are trying to do, but we also see huge holes in, this idea of verification with an ID or biometrics. This is a way to do it responsibly. Like, do we even know of a responsible way to do this that does kind of satisfy both sides of things, like makes things more secure and respects our data and our privacy? I mean, it seems like they're at opposition with each other. That's almost impossible. And
they are. Like, France wants it more than anyone. They're going ahead with it while acknowledging the massive problems, which, I can respect, even if I think it's wrong. At least they're being honest that this doesn't exist in the form we want it in. It's, we're going to have to take it in its imperfect form. And that's a fine stance. I'll disagree with it, but it's an honest stance. But the exact problem is what you're getting to. There isn't the technology that we wish there was. And if there was, I'd be a lot more open to a lot of things here. Like, if you could use that to verify age in a fully privacy respecting way before someone was able to access Pornhub or something like that, I wouldn't have an issue with that. With some sites I would, but not that kind of stuff and certain other things. But the problem is that just doesn't exist. If you go in person somewhere to get cigarettes or to buy, pornographic videos or whatever, you can have someone look at your ID and never keep a record of it. But you can't do that online.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what kind of penalties does one of these defined social media companies face if this bill is brought into law and they fail to adhere to it? What are the penalties? Does it specify that?
Yeah, it's many thousands of dollars, and it has its own formula for calculating it. It's something like the number of users affected versus the number of violations, something to that effect. That's pretty common for this kind of stuff. Often they'll just set it at many thousands of dollars, but this has an equation. But the penalties aren't as effective as the whole problem is you can't have these penalties for something that's an impossible task, or that's going to force these companies to violate their users' privacy, because, this is creating just massive honeypots for hackers if they're maintaining this information. And to its credit, the legislation discourages people from maintaining the age verification information. They're saying, you don't have to maintain it. You can find other ways to verify, but it's all a wink and a nod, because if they're not using the government method, they're of course going to maintain that information to prove compliance. And then the government can get warrants to look for it. Because right now we do have some real true anonymity online. People will tip their hands by tweeting their personal information or by leaving other traces of who they are. Anonymity isn't perfect, but this really gets rid of that if you see these provisions in the law that says something like, the government cannot access the age verification information in order to link specific people to specific accounts unless there's a warrant. But government gets hacked a lot and government likes personal information a lot. Like they violate the Fourth Amendment all the time. Like I don't trust that. And again, it's the whole problem with this law is that it's not workable while protecting people's rights. On all of this, in addition to violating the First Amendment right to anonymous speech, like Federalist Papers.
Yeah. Okay. So then, given your perspective that you just shared, do you think this has are we going to see this go into law? Likelihood of this going into law at some point? And, are there revisions that you would like to see that would kind of win you over as far as this is concerned?
So I think there are things they could do to make it better, but the core problem is the technology they want doesn't exist. And that, you can't fix that. If the technology one day does exist, I'd be willing to talk further and give more ideas and, work on this. But there are things they could make it better, such as defining algorithm as not everything, like exempting some math from algorithm, the definition. But the thing they want doesn't exist. And there is rational desire to protect kids from certain content, but I think this goes way too far. And the problem is there is a lot of desire to protect kids from stuff online, no matter the costs. And I think this is what this is. And because of that, I think you could see it go into law. Not that I'm certain it will. I think some people might take a look at this and get worried. People like Ron Wyden in the Senate, who is the father of Section 230 and also very interested in privacy protection. But there's a lot of, let's protect the kids and honest stuff there, but it's just not a good bill and it's not workable, but it might be enacted.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Shoshana, always a pleasure to get you on the network, and a pleasure in this case to have the chance to talk with you when you're on the network. So thank you for hopping on today and sharing your thoughts on this bill. If people want to follow the work that you and your organization are doing, tell them a little bit about it real quick.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love the network. You guys are such nerds, and it's nice to talk to other nerds. I'm at Senator Shoshana on Twitter for as long as it exists, and we're also at RSI on Twitter for that same amount of time. And you can see all our work at rstreet.org. Right on. Thank you, Shoshana. It's been a pleasure. We'll talk to you soon.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was Tech News Weekly 283 about the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act. So, we see this recurring patterns of anything that has kids in the title is probably bad news. It's a very popular thing when you want to go after something that is a kind of well-established public good. Put kids in the title, and that'll justify things. It's like I'm waiting for the Stop Automotives from Running Over Kids Act or something like that to ban all cars. It's just like that's kind of the thinking is if anything ever once happens to a kid, then it should be, a convenient excuse to ban something that somebody wants to ban or regulate or whatever. So a lot of times we still have this kind of Wild West period of tech, and government has been frustrated by not being able to completely control this aspect of our lives, for people to be able to reach out to each other and, have effective protests and things like that. It's like, this cannot stand. So France in particular always wants to go after the control of the internet. They've done some really wild things. They've made, several mere accusations of piracy means your internet connection gets cut and things like that, which were struck down. But still, if they would even try that sort of thing in a world that is so internet dependent, just shows the ridiculous obsession with control that's going on. And here we have, as I say, banning math, because it's and this is kind of an oversight, I'm sure. When they say algorithm, I'm sure they mean more complicated things like, recommendation engines and whatever. So, explicitly saying, okay, well, this content is popular with kids, therefore you might want it to if you're a kid, and saying, no, you shouldn't be considering that. And age verification also has been a bugaboo for a long time. A lot of times, well, in the time of CDA, age verification just meant having a credit card, really. It's like, well, kids don't have credit cards, therefore, if you have a credit card, you must not be a kid. Ergo, yeah, it's wanting things, as I said, wanting a technology that doesn't exist and mandating a technology that doesn't exist. And it usually just comes like, well, do your best. And also usually comes out to, well, spend lots of money on this, which innately makes it a problem for the little guy. Now, they're talking about fines being proportional to number of users and incidents and all that. So I guess that's sort of a break for the little guy, but depending on the fines, it could be a lot of small outfits. They're not making, they're losing money. Especially if they're not set up to make money in the first place. Then all you have is your expenses of running a service. And they're saying, nope, if you can't make it perfect, which doesn't exist, just don't be online. And I guess effectively means, well, if you don't have lawyers and such on retainer, don't bother. And again, that is a very anti-little guy kind of issue. A lot of times we think when people are trying to regulate tech, they're thinking of the big players and forgetting that big players started as small players. Facebook was kind of a nothing burger in the days of MySpace, and it grew like wildfire because it was able to do things that Facebook itself does not allow done on its platform. It's like, you may not do to us what we did to MySpace, which was make it so that you could use Facebook to get your messages from MySpace, so you could have the effect of your whole social graph coming over with you. You wouldn't lose contact with anybody, and in fact it became, rather than a walled garden, it became shooting fish in a barrel. It's like, well, this person's social graph, they're constantly doing messages with them. So if you create a intermediary that does the messages for you, and every message ends with, hey, I'm on Facebook, you should be on Facebook too, then, of course your growth rate is going to be insane. So we've seen these kinds of issues over and over again. It's like one rule for me, a different rule for you, or making rules that only the big players can comply with, and effectively creating a barrier of entry to small players from ever displacing the existing monopolies or resisting that happening, which is really unfortunate. The new stuff coming along is where all the energy comes from. A lot of times the existing guys, they adapt the features of the new player and or try to buy them out. So, like some changes come in, but really it's sort of changed towards the medium. Like, stories comes up, and all of a sudden every social media thing has a version of stories. People leaving Facebook for Instagram, fine. Facebook buys Instagram. You're leaving Facebook for Facebook. It's really quite upsetting. But, at least we have one legislator who gets it, Ron Wyden, as they said, the father of Section 230, and just generally with it, on his team, I suppose. He doesn't have to know everything. He just has to have the people with him that know everything. And he does a good job. Generally, if he's attached to a bill, it makes sense. Not the case here. All right, and then with that, let's move on to the next clip, a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. This is MacBreak Weekly 868, Tracking Tag Standards.
This is Twit.
Apple and Google both have teamed up to work together to prevent lost item trackers from being used to track people without their permission. This is something that's been a little bit of an issue for Apple. It's been an issue for Tile. Google does not yet sell tags, right? But there's been a strong rumor for a long time, Andy, you cover Android and your material podcast, that they're going to do that. So maybe this is a sign that Google's going to announce something at Google I/O.
Yeah, and it's just long overdue. This is a valuable market. This is a device that people want, but there's just no safe way to market this thing. I mean,
Apple makes an Android app that works like about half the time, and you have to know about it, and you have to have it installed.
Yeah, I mean, this is both companies doing things, particularly Apple, doing something that's very, very responsible. What they're proposing is that they've already gotten together and proposed a specification that would be platform agnostic. It would just be a resource that anybody could put into anything. It's a proposed industry specification to help combat the misuse of Bluetooth location device for market tracking, and it's basically. It basically means that no matter what your alert system is, it will work with any compatible device.
Samsung, Tile, or AirTags, or whatever Google might announce. And it's built into the OS, iPhone and Android. Right. And that's kind of what you want, so that if somebody's tracking you, just for people who haven't experienced this, I experience it all the time, it will pop up a message saying there's an AirTag following you around and it's not yours. You should know about this. Have you guys seen this?
Oh, yeah.
It would be interesting. Yeah. I read it. There are simultaneous press releases on Google and Apple's news sites, and neither of them answer a certain question about whether or not this common specification on both platforms would also extend the Find My network, so that now every Android phone is also helping you locate Find My devices, which would in itself be pretty darn interesting, because if I could also locate a lost phone or a lost Chromebook based on the fact that someone with an iPhone has recently passed by wherever I left it behind, that would be pretty slick too.
One of the things I'm kind of curious about, though, is that what happens if someone steals something of yours that has that AirTag? You don't necessarily want to turn that off. It's tracking them now because they stole your bag. Or what do airlines do when they just decide, they're going to turn off people's AirTags if they're, like I put all my cases all now have AirTags in them. And, I'm not super excited about the ideas of the airline or baggage or whatever deciding to turn off my AirTags.
How would they turn it off? You mean find them and take them out?
If it says that you're being tracked.
Oh, they would see it.
They would see it, and then they would,
like the airplane, put a little iPhone in the airplane, and they could see all the AirTags in the
the AirTags are all sitting there. They're all sitting in the bay when they go through, and I just there's I definitely see why you don't want to track people, but I think that what will end up happening is it'll affect a lot more people.
Well, we'll see,
because I don't think that many people are tracking other people with AirTags.
Yeah.
So
there are better ways to do it. Probably
edge case. There's a lot of better ways to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an edge case, and I think when they solve that edge case, the less edge case is going to be valid reasons why there's a tracker that happens to be going along someone who took something from you, or baggage claim or something else, and it gets turned off.
Right.
I think that's going to be a more likely thing to occur than people actually tracking each other.
I'm actually surprised that airlines don't have Faraday cages in their luggage compartments, right? So, I mean, you don't want anything transmitting out of the luggage compartment. I bet they do.
I don't think you see it. Once it takes off, you don't really know. So far, my experience has been, once it takes off, it doesn't, your phones aren't really getting anywhere.
Right.
They're just burning up battery trying to find something.
Right.
And so every once in a while, you'll see it appear. But overall, I think that when we're doing,
it's mostly when your bags are on the ground that they might want you to know we've sent them on to Philadelphia.
Well, like a good example is we gave it to a shipper who's a really good shipper. I'm not going to name them because we like using them, but we have an expectation that I gave them 10 bags that had $250,000 of hardware in them. And I expect that to go to a warehouse. And when I looked at the trackers, I saw this little cloud that was at somebody's house.
Oh, that's not what you want.
And then it went down and it dropped stuff off, and that was fine. And then when they picked it up, they went to somebody's house again, and then they went off. But they obviously had spent the night at a house. Now maybe they put it in a garage. I have to admit the shininess of that company. Little worn off, because I was expecting it to go to some kind of secure facility.
No, all the companies now do weird stuff like that. In fact, I saw a UPS van out in the lot, pulled up next to a sedan, and the guy was taking packages off the UPS truck and stuffing them into the sedan, like filling up the back seat. And I thought, should I call the cops on this? And then it turns out that what they do is they hire these freelance ununiformed people to do deliveries, and that's what's going on. They're taking some, offloading them, and maybe that guy decides to park his Buick in his garage overnight.
Well, it was less expensive than to send it by air, so I'm sure that they have a different way of doing it. But it was a guy, it's a guy with his van.
Yeah,
and it's a nice van when it showed up, and we filled it up with.
Yeah, see, there you go. It was just some freelancer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Apple and Google said the features will be completed by the end of the year and implemented in future versions of iOS and Android. But this is the right direction anyway. It's kind of nice to see Apple and Google doing something together, hand in hand, arm in arm.
This is the last time we saw that Apple Google logo was, of course, when they did COVID
the COVID thing. Yeah. And Matter, right? Matter, the Matter standard, aren't Apple and Google both in the Matter?
Yeah, I don't think they did a joint press release for that.
Oh,
right. They're both on board. They didn't develop it together. Right. I mean, I'm looking at the draft specification here, and it really does seem very thorough about the difference between making sure, basically, it controls like when the tracker should advertise its presence and when it should advertise its presence.
Oh, that's good. Thought about when it should be. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it basically goes from case to case to case to case between, like, if someone has activated it saying that, hey, this thing is lost, please broadcast your location, versus someone who's trying to track. They know that I have an AirTag inside my bag, and so they can track me by tracking my location via that air tracker, or having an AirTag that doesn't belong to me that's been slipped into my luggage or slipped into my car. It does seem to be very, very thorough, and there's a lot of, as you'd expect, a lot of language about basically making sure that this doesn't screw up people's lives when they don't want to be bothered by it doesn't protect it. Sorry about that. It doesn't prevent the feature from working as it's supposed to work. Also doesn't cause problems for people who want this thing to remain silent.
I mean, I definitely think that it'll be interesting to see how things like airlines use it, because not only I, but other people have been able to tell the airline more accurately than it knows where our bags are. We've gone, like I FedEx couldn't find one of my bags, and I was like, it's in the LAX FedEx in the back corner.
That probably drives them crazy.
Like, here is, it's in the last little, like, I know exactly where that bag
knows now.
And I know there's at least one airline that sort of said, don't do it. And it's like, okay.
Lufthansa briefly said that we were going to ban it.
Just don't do it. It's like, well, what are you going to do? And the same is true with this, which is, what are you going to do? You're not going to,
right.
Everybody, they're going to know that they're being tracked, and I think a delivery company is going to know that they're being tracked. I think that's okay. I would say, though, that the two things that are at cross purposes here do seem to be people who are trying to prevent thefts and people who are trying to prevent stalking, because those are similar profiles. So that's the tricky part. We just had it's even in our show list. The mayor of New York City stood up and said, we're going to put AirTags in people's cars and use them to stop car theft. It's like, okay.
You're kidding
also,
me.
Someone donated 500 AirTags available for free to people to add to their cars, and the police are actually also recommending AirTags.
It's a terrible idea.
Yeah,
this is why when we talk about people who run the government, oftentimes are digital children, and they don't understand there are so many better ways to do this.
This is as bad as Adams. It's Eric Adams saying, "I'm going to take my salary in Bitcoin," which, by the way, he quickly changed his tune on that one.
A lot of people I know refer to him as Mayor That Guy now.
That guy,
right? It's that guy. But this is such a weird thing. But I mean, again, I get the impulse. My son, when he started riding his bike to high school, I mounted an AirTag in a undisclosed location in case it got stolen. Like, I totally get it. Even though Apple says this is not for tracking stolen items, it's for tracking lost items, and I know they say that, but that is at cross purposes. If they make this really good so that you know immediately that you're being stalked, it also means that whoever stole your bike knows that they are being tracked, right? And they can look for the tracker and remove it.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. I mean, you just have to deal with those two things being at cross purposes. And I think in the end, trying to protect people will probably win. And I think that's the right call.
So the AirTags, there's 500 of them. How many people in the Bronx? More than 1 million. So 500 of you lucky people will get AirTags. NYPD, Eric Adams said, the mayor said, that guy, will not track the AirTags being given away. Instead, when owners realize their car is missing, they can notify police, who will track the stolen vehicle with the owner's permission. How are you going to do that? I'll give you a login to my Apple account.
I'm so not.
And
I think that may just be, don't take the law into your own hands. Call the police.
Well, see, that's the real thing. That's the real risk is, okay, now I'm going to add it to my Find My, and I'm going to go track that guy down.
Yeah, and that's dangerous.
You don't want that.
Yeah.
Okay.
AirTags is a technology that has turned out to not be as revolutionary as we maybe hope that it might be. In a way that some technologies do change the world, but AirTags, I think, maybe not one of them.
Isn't there LoJack? There are ways to do this. That's what LoJack did.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are other tools for stalkers that are much more efficient than this.
Yeah, you can buy a GPS for less than an AirTag.
And for cars, yeah.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was MacBreak Weekly 868 talking about tracking tag standards. So, yeah, dogs, cats living together, Apple and Android working together on a standard for these for the tags. So this is, as often happens, a technology comes out before there are norms around it. And it causes problems. We're not really sure what to do with it. Things maybe, the law hasn't caught up with it. Peer pressure hasn't caught up with it. When putting an AirTag on someone is just an unthinkable taboo, then you won't need as many laws about it. As it now, it's just sort of feel. I'm sure I can see a lot of people thinking of it as just kind of a harmless prank or. Mild curiosity about where someone is. And it's just like, yeah, not good. And again, it's kind of crossed this line. Like when the police were doing this sort of thing, they were putting trackers on cars without any sort of, court orders. They were saying, well, you're just, you're moving around in public. And so we're putting a tracker on you instead of having, officers, wasting money on officers to follow you around everywhere. And I think that was part of the point, when you make something privacy invading that you make it trivially easy, then it's going to be done more. I mean, that's not a brain twister. You can't follow everyone. So if you have to physically follow them, you're only going to do it to the cases that most require it. And in a similar way, you could say the same thing for here. It's like, I could follow the car around all over town. So what's the difference putting an AirTag on it? It's like, well, because you don't have the time to follow everyone around town. And that people moving through a public space don't necessarily have recordings of where they are. They aren't recognized by every single person that they pass. And so you can be in public and be relatively anonymous if you're not doing anything weird. If you are, riding around on a unicycle with a flaming bagpipe or something, as happens in Portland, yeah, people are going to post to Twitter where you are and what's happening, and that's not a real surprise. It's probably a feature. But when you're just minding your own business and going shopping and, some sleaze is like thinking he's a part of your life now because he's tracking you all over and knows where you do your grocery shopping and knows where you do your nails and have your hair cut and all that. Yeah. I think it comes back to just not a completely different topic here, is we really need to have a lot more investment, both from the government and as a society, in mental health. We need to, catch people that are kind of going into some weird little bubble a lot earlier and help them socialize and be good citizens, because healthy people don't want to track people that, have done nothing wrong to them. It's like, yes, of course you want to know where your stolen car is. And yeah, it's, it's a temptation, especially when the police are busy, to not go have a look yourself and see where your stuff is. So that's going to be a problem. And here they're handing out AirTags, which presumably will be registered by the individuals they're being given to, and not accessible to the police unless they share that data. It'd be a different thing if the tags were not registered to you, if they're registered to the police, then by these same sort of anti-stalking features, they would be going off constantly saying, hey, this AirTag's following you. Hey, this AirTag's following you. I guess you could acknowledge it after a couple times and maybe the warnings would stop. I've never had to actually deal with that. But, a a lot of people, they want to use things in a way where it doesn't start beeping. Like, and I think tracking your property, perfectly reasonable. If you want to put tags in your property and you don't necessarily want the thief to get an alert saying, hey, you're being tracked. And at least AirTags, they have an audible beep that can also start going off. And it's interesting that one of the popular hacks is, here's how to disable the beeping on your AirTag. Basically how to remove the speaker without damaging anything else. It's what people want. And as they say, there's lots of other technology that you can put together that does the same thing. It's, not as polished and everything, but, doesn't need to be. If you just want to be able to track your property, then you can do that at some point. I guess power is an issue. A lot of times the homebrew methods are more power consumptive than an AirTag, which is optimized for longevity by a company with the resources to optimize for longevity. So this is still all over the map. It just goes to show new stuff causes problems. And when a technology comes out, you have to, I would like to think they would start to, kind of work through these issues before they put them out in public. But, as an offshoot of the software has no liability, the prevailing economically most profitable methodology is, well, just get the thing to where it barely works and put it out the door, and your users will test it for you, and they will find all the problems, and they will, fall on all the spiked pits, and then you can fix the stuff that people are screaming about the loudest, in that order, or at least what is getting the most negative attention, so that you can, preserve your sales. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, let's move on to the final clip today. Another Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. This is This Week in Enterprise Tech 541, FDA Standards for Medical Devices.
This is Twit.
Medical devices are a great way to save lives, but not so great for actually protecting your data. In fact, we talked about this. Some hospitals actually have those devices in air gap environments. Now, according to this dark reading article, that's why the FDA has issued a new set of rules to make sure these devices don't become easy targets for hackers and cyber criminals. Now, from now on, medical device makers must show the FDA how they plan to keep their devices updated and secure from digital threats. They also must provide a list of all software components using a software bill of materials that go into their devices so they can any vulnerabilities can be quickly spotted and fixed right away. Now, these new rules are part of the law that Congress actually passed in 2023, which sets some basic cybersecurity standards for medical devices. Now, the FDA is also looking into how to actually make sure the medical devices are serviced securely and safely, and is asking for feedback on this topic. So you actually provide some of that. The FDA's actions are part of a larger effort to actually boost the security and resilience of health IT. But experts actually warn that there's still a lot of work to be done here and to prevent hackers from compromising those medical devices and putting your patients at risk. Now, the FDA's new guidance is an important step in the right direction, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. Now, I'm going to bring Cheever back in here because, what are your recommendations? You're a network guy. What are your recommendations here on how to protect medical devices from cyber threats?
Well, actually, I think this is a really, really good first step, mostly because Kurt has actually brought this up when we talk about this theme. And the problem is right now, or at least until these rules take effect, a change, even in, say, something like modifying, say, a CT machine, you actually have to get it recertified, even though you're just patching bugs. Well, this might be blowing it a little bit out of proportion, but there has been horror stories about medical instrument people saying they can't change X because it was approved with Y. It's frustrating, and this is just me, talking out loud and thinking out loud that the FDA, I think, is trying to close those loopholes and make it easier to do things like major bug fixes, adding this and that, maybe changing libraries if a DLL or something has been found that's compromised. Make it easier and faster for medical instrument developers to make intelligent changes that we all know should be done, but their hands have been tied. And if you've ever really looked hard at the regulatory issues surrounding a medical instrument maker, you would throw up your hands in disgust and walk away because they are convoluted with a capital C. So I think this is a great move in the right direction. I think some of the things that are changing are in the about time category. And, anyone with a good software background has been throwing up their hands because why hasn't this been done sooner? And it's because when you have a large governmental agency involved with making rules, they're going to try and, kill an ant with a sledgehammer. And
it's true. It's really true. Now, I think it's definitely a good step in the right direction because obviously you always tend to look, organizations especially, they go and look at the medical devices that they're purchasing and they want things that are FDA approved. And so if this means that these devices and these, these IoT devices, whatever they are not marked as FDA approved because they are not following the guidelines that FDA provides, I think that's going to be a ding on people's bottom line. Like the people are not going to buy them because of that. And I think, that means that organizations are going to have to step up and start following these things. It's almost a forcing function for them to do so. But I think the problem is there's still a ton of devices in this world right now that are already out there. They're already insecure and they're already having problems. We've talked about this before. You obviously make sure things are patched, make sure you're updating passwords regularly, make sure things are not have access to the internet if they don't need it. Be careful of, making sure that your information on those devices are secure. Look for signs, obviously, of cybersecurity access. Obviously, this is assume breach scenarios where if people are trying to access the device unexpectedly, you should know that. Keep track of that. So there's lots of things that you can do to at least assist yourself and your organization on making sure that you keep these things secure. Cheever, is anything else you recommend to people to make sure that they're managing what they already have in their inventory?
Air gaps are truly wonderful things. It's not hard to set up, say, for instance, an isolated VLAN just for these things and don't give it internet access. Don't make it so that the CT scan operator can check their email on the console. That's not a good combination. But I do want to bring up one other issue. As we start getting medical equipment that are, quote, not FDA approved because of these new rules, what's going to happen to them? The used medical equipment market, I think, is going to explode. And I keep wondering where they're going to go. So if we have nice, strong rules in the U.S., are they going to go to second and third world nations? I don't like those labels because they connotate the wrong things, but there are several have-not organizations that would probably be real interested in buying used medical equipment, but I'm hoping they exercise some intelligence on how they use that equipment and also protect their patients' privacy. Just because we change our rules doesn't mean it's going to make it affordable for everybody else.
Right. Yeah. I wish there was a grandfathered rule where, pre-existing devices, even if you buy them, are required to still provide software bill of materials. Are also required you to provide, how long they're going to be, how often and how long they're going to be, serviced and brought up to date. I feel like this still needs to be a requirement. There's still a bunch of things missing there. And yeah, I do agree. Like this is definitely going to force organizations, if they have the money, to upgrade and move these things out into the secondary market, which, there'll definitely be a flood out there of people trying to make back that cost. But that also means that manufacturers are going to want to make back their costs, right? Like this is going to cost them even more money to manage what they ship.
Yeah. And I guess this is, again, my personal opinion is, what happened, folks? This is actually doing things that make sense. If nothing else, that software bill of materials should have been something you had internal. If wishes were fishes, there's a lot of wishful thinking going on here. And I'm hoping and praying that the DevOps people, development folks for a lot of these medical instrument companies have paid attention. And that software bill of materials really should have been part of their original documentation, even if it's only internal. So if you guys have been paying attention, maybe, just maybe, this would be a new set of rules that are easy to comply with, or should be easy to comply with, or I wish were easy to comply with. Choose your, A, B, or C. There's a lot of things that can be done, should be done, but have they been done?
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Enterprise Tech 541, FDA Standards for Medical Devices. So we did cover this story when this first passed. And yeah, some great features included that the FDA was phasing in the enforcement and providing active help and guidance to those that wanted to comply and improve their devices. So this wasn't about, hey, let's wipe out the existing market and, just have nothing for sale. It's like, well, let's, as fast as possible, get people up to speed on making this work. So that was good. And as I said, just the real basics. Some of the stuff is like, really? You weren't doing this before? Build of materials. When you're using all these, free or paid for libraries, and what you have integrated into your product, what the library you're using is and what the libraries it uses are, and so on. And when a flaw is published in one of those things and an update is done, you can say, oh, that affects my device. You just know, instead of having to actively go looking for it periodically. It's just like, boom, as soon as there's a known flaw that you're depending on, fix it. This shouldn't be, brain surgery, but because there has been no liability attached in general to tech products, it simply wasn't, if it didn't cause the consumer to stop buying, it didn't matter. As long as the consumer keeps buying, fine. If it's toxic and they don't know it, fine. It's just like, it just doesn't matter. And a lot of Internet of Things devices usually have the visible function and a lot of invisible processing behind it. And so as long as the visible function, like say it's a light bulb, if the light bulb turns on and off, the consumer is, doesn't think of anything as being wrong, potentially being wrong. They have no way of knowing anything's wrong. Same thing with, cameras and such, and smart speakers. So, as long as they seem to work, fine. And they are capable of so much more under the hood that it's, and again, because this really sense of detachment, it's like it's good enough to sell out the door. That's all they care about. And so they were just rife with security problems, just famously. And, those can be used as a bridge to attack machines inside your firewall. It can be used to engage in all sorts of mischief and criminal activity coming from your IP address. So you're helping them launder the location of the origin of the attack, and possibly, getting some sort of liability attached too. So it's important, and I'm glad more things are being done to fix that. To, hey, how are you going to fix this once it's out in the field? That's another important thing. Things like, your pacemaker, you really don't want anyone with a laptop and an account on 4chan to know how to make your pacemaker stop working, or your insulin pump or whatever. just for the lulls, right? And start messing with it. As I said, this is way overdue. And hopefully this will spread. I'm not sure, FDA and medical devices kind of go together, but I hope that this spreads to other tech, especially the ones that don't have a real high visibility into what's going on inside them, to have more regulation on making sure they're safe, that they're doing the bare minimum. That, if the consumer is not in a position to make financial choices based on substandard products because they don't know it's substandard, they don't know all the horrible things it's doing to them and to others, then that is an ideal case for regulation. To say, okay, since the consumer can't tell the difference between a good and a bad product, we're going to step in and help them identify that. And, make sure the bad stuff does not get into the mainstream market. We're talking about smart locks, cameras, smart speakers, all this stuff we have attached to our network and in our homes and maybe on our persons or in our persons. And, we don't really understand what they're doing. The manufacturer throws up all sorts of proprietary claims, so even if you wanted to know, you can't really know. And so, okay, regulate. And building materials, huge first step. If they just get that right, then at least it's possible to know if it has a problem. And to demand some updates when that happens. Because once something's sold, there's not a high motivation to keep providing additional service. Hey, we made our money, we gave you a product, and now we just, want to forget anything ever happened. We'll keep all your contact information and every bit of data that we've been able to glean on you so that we can sell it. But other than that, we don't want to know you. And, some best practices. There's some things that just don't need to be on the internet, like, your CT scanner. You don't need, as I said, you don't need to be able to check your mail on your CT scanner. You've got a phone, use your phone. And that's sometimes our feature list gets out ahead of what makes sense, because every feature you offer is potentially a mechanism to be attacked through, as what you call the attack surface increases with every feature you add. And so take that into account. If you're adding a feature that no one will ever use, it just sort of sounds neat, but it decreases your security, just don't include that feature, so-called feature. I don't know if decreasing your security really can be called a feature, if that's the net effect of adding that thing. All right, so enough on that. Just before we wrap up here, just a little bit of news from the Spark Studio Salem Makerspace, which I'm a board member of. We had a meeting. One of the things Makerspaces likes to do, and again, a Makerspace, I like to, my short description of those is a shared Mad Scientist garage. And in our case, it's a nonprofit where we offer tools, space, and informed and interested and curious peers to help, achieve our making dreams, just learning about things and making some trivial modifications to our stuff. So when something breaks, you don't just have to throw it into the landfill. You can actually fix it up or use it as part of some new thing. A lot of fun. And one of the kind of traditions of makerspaces, reach out to other groups that maybe have some overlap in participants and otherwise would be meeting at coffee shops and stuff, and say, hey, let's do a one-off night or maybe a monthly night where you have your meeting at our space. And, you can get some cross-pollination between the two groups if, people want to go this way or that way, or at the very least, an exchange of knowledge and, kind of a building of the making community. So in that spirit, we had a meeting of the West Salem Fabric Arts meetup at our physical space, and they had a great time. It was all the sorts of things they would do in a coffee house, except in an environment that just sort of carries a bit of creative energy. You're looking around and you're seeing the things that other people have built and, interesting tools that you don't normally see. And, that led to saying, hey, we have some sewing machines and such that we're not using. Maybe we can contribute those. and maybe we might team up on getting an embroidery machine. So that would be an amazing ad for both of us. It'd be a great tool to have in the makerspace, and it would be a great resource for those that were visiting. We had our first Tuesday social over at Ratchet, as we like to do, and it was a great pleasure to meet several new people and add them to our Slack. And, we've created some, like for the fabric arts people, we created an arts and crafts channel in our Slack. And we met a gentleman last night that wants to start specifically a 3D printing club, for just reinforcing knowledge and sharing output of that kind of thing. And he had a very playful attitude towards it. He had a little magnetic spinner that he's like, okay, I'm going to do the pitch for the 3D printing club, and I'll finish it before this thing stops spinning. And that was that was a kind of a nice mechanism, and having a lot of fun. So that'd be like, okay, well, we have 3D printers, so that would be great to when they have a meeting, have it at our space, and everyone's knowledge will be shared and upgraded, which is a wonderful thing. Makerspaces are known as the natural habitat of broken 3D printers because they generally need a lot of tweaking to continue working. And where an individual might get flummoxed, it's like, well, I didn't use it very often and now it doesn't work. So boom, that's kind of the end of it. And, they'll donate. Okay, I'll donate my broken printer to, the local makerspace or whatever. And so that's usually how that winds up. And we've been really blessed with a couple people that have specifically just been really interested in fixing and or upgrading the 3D printers that were donated to us. And through them, a great opportunity for other people to be educated in the kinds of things that go wrong in 3D printing and how you fix them and the adjustments that you make along the way to kind of keep things from going wrong in the first place. So that's been fun. So we've been meeting every Saturday at 1 p.m. having an open day, which is sort of a, hack the hackerspace, kind of do upgrades, do cleaning, do fixing on 3D printers, install a new overhead fan, things like that, or projector, new projector screen. And that has been pretty popular, but not everybody can make it out to Saturdays. And one of our members has been coming in consistently on Tuesdays anyway, and so he's offered to oversee a Tuesday night maker night every week. We're looking at probably 6 o'clock on Tuesdays, and we might even do it as an overlap with our first Tuesday social, because in this case we had our social going on like a quarter mile from the space, and people were going back and forth between, hanging out at Ratchet and, having a little tour of the makerspace and hanging out there. So I think that could work out well to just even have nights where we're doing both. And with that, we probably won't need the third Thursday maker night anymore. So we'll probably stop that and just like, okay, well, with this, we're going to have 2 times that we're open to the public every week. And that is a great chance for people to kind of come in and introduce themselves. They can, hang out, do a little work here and there. And if, they really feel engaged with the space and they want to donate something, or, they just want to have, more regular access, then they can, maybe be interested in doing a higher level support, which would give them that access. So, good things are happening at the makerspace, which is a really great thing to be able to say. All right, and with that, you've done it again. You spent an hour talking about technology and how a better understanding of it can lead to better outcomes at home, at work, and in our civic engagements. I hope you'll join us next Wednesday and every Wednesday, noon to 1 o'clock, to continue these conversations on Northwest Tech Show.